Others will be joining us, but just officially, good afternoon to everyone, and thank you for joining our Spring Professional Advisory Lunch and Learn. We're just grateful for the expertise that you bring to our community and really that continued opportunity to partner with you and expand our knowledge together on how we can do this important work together in collaboration. So really our combined goal is to maximize charitable opportunities with your clients and our donors and benefit broadly the nonprofit sector that we all serve and love. So we're thrilled to have our friend and colleague Gordon Fischer here presenting today. I know that we'll have an opportunity to learn and share together a lot. So I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Lori, who's going to walk us through kind of the housekeeping and intro.
All right, very good. Thank you, Kay. I will just reiterate that welcome to the second event of our Professional Advisor Series of 2021. Just want to say a quick thank you to those of you who may have returned the survey that we sent out in March and April. We appreciate that feedback. We're using it to determine topics for future sessions. And we would continue to welcome any feedback or suggestions that you have, whether it be for suggestions or content, or if you have a burning desire yourself to share something, we would love to hear about that. So speaking of future content, just a little teaser, I want to let you know that Todd Hiddingson, who is Wealth Advisor with Bergen KDB, is going to be our June presenter. And he's going to be talking on wealth planning challenges and opportunities for advisors in 2021. So stay tuned for more details and your email invitation. Today's session will have continuing education credits available. So I will be planning to send out the CLE number in a follow-up email to all the attendees. And I will ask you just real briefly, if you each wouldn't mind just putting your full name in the chat to make sure that I know who I'm sending it to and that I have the correct contact information. To do that, I realized after the last session that not everybody necessarily has their name on screen, and that was a little challenging to try to figure out who was who, since I'm still meeting a lot of you. So thank you for that. If you need CFP credits, you can do one of two things. If you have that number available and you want to send it to me in a private message through the chat, that would be great. Or if you don't have your number available and you just want to put in parentheses behind your name, need CFP, I can get in touch with you by email or phone call to get that number and include that on our roster for those credits. So. All right. And also, we are a small but mighty group. So probably if there are questions coming up, we'll have the opportunity just to ask them at different times. But if something does come up that you want to make sure that we talk about, please also feel free to use the chat for that as well. And we'll make sure to hit those topics if you have questions. So I just want to now give a little bit of a formal introduction to our speaker today, Gordon from the Gordon Fischer Law Firm. The mission of Gordon's firm is to promote and maximize charitable giving in Iowa. And his practice offers 5 core services. He does estate planning, training of nonprofit boards and staff, employment law guidance for nonprofits, handling nonprofit compliance issues, and working with nonprofits and donors on complex gifts. And he has been practicing law in Iowa for more than 25 years. And I just want to point out in his experience that in 2013, he did leave the firm he was with to become Vice President of Gift Planning Strategies for the Community Foundation of Greater Des Moines, where he helped donors plan and achieve their philanthropic goals. So we're glad that he has that experience in our world. And more information can be found on Gordon on his website, which is gordonfisherlawfirm.com. I'll pop that in the chat. It's a very active blog with lots of posts. And there's also a subscription form for his free monthly newsletter called Go Fish, which I love. So with that, I will turn it over to Gordon.
Well, thank you so much, Lori and Kay and Jenna. Thank you so much for all that you do. CFNEIA is one of the most important and one of the most impactful community foundations in Iowa, which is really saying something because we've got some great foundations in Iowa, and I just am so grateful for the opportunity and even to talk today to such an august group. But even more so, I'm just so grateful for all the wonderful work that CFNEIA does in our shared community and our shared state. You make such a difference in just a myriad of ways. If I started to talk about all of the positive traits of Kay or the positive traits of Lori, I would be easily taking a full hour. So, and then you wouldn't get continuing education credits. Well, maybe you would. Maybe you'd get more actually for that. But in any case, we thank you, both of you, for everything you do. Jenna, as marketing manager, thank you for everything you do. And without further ado, I'm going to share my screen and um, uh, dive into an outline. Let me know if you can't see this. I assume you can. And the topic today was previously mentioned, the pros and cons of charitable giving of 5 types of non-cash assets. Not necessarily the most scintillating of topics, but I would look at it this way. I don't know how many folks on the line have seen the musical Hamilton. There's a wonderful line near the end of that musical where Alexander Hamilton says that a legacy is planting flowers in a garden you'll never see. And as I get older, and as I come to these chats and realize that I look by far the oldest of anyone on the chats, I kind of tend to think about what my legacy will be. And maybe some of you are as well. And I think one thing that we can do in all of our various professional roles is talk about the importance of charitable giving through the community foundation, with the community foundation, because it really can make a difference. As someone who has spent 25 years working with nonprofits and the impact nonprofits have on their communities, let me assure you that charitable giving it's really kind of amazing what an impact it can have. Sometimes that impact is noticeable right away. Other times it is planting flowers for a garden you'll never see. And it will be young people like undergraduate student Ella Daniels, who's on the line from the University of Iowa. Maybe in her lifetime she'll see. But in any case, it really is important. The other thing to recognize is when I go through this stuff, some of this, probably most of this, and maybe in a lot of cases, all of this is going to be stuff you already know, at least to some degree. And I guess what I'm hoping to do is to talk to the grass tops about the grass roots, if I may use that phrase. So you're all professional advisors in various ways. You know a lot of this stuff. You know a tremendous amount of this stuff. The point is, though, do your clients, do your customers, do the people you work with, the people at your church, the people at the crisis center you volunteer for, the museum you volunteer for, or the nonprofit whose board you serve on. So, I'm hoping to remind you of some of the important aspects of non-cash charitable giving. And again, in the hope that you'll pass that along to your clients and customers, or be reminded to pass that along to your clients and customers. So let's dive in. 5 types of non-cash assets. First, we do have to talk about the scintillating topic of short-term versus long-term capital gain property, but I will keep it brief. Capital assets really can cover a myriad of different types of assets: stocks, bonds, real estate, art, antiques. And the amount that a donor can claim as an income tax charitable deduction does depend on whether that property, whether that asset is considered short-term or long-term. Long-term holding period is 12 months plus a day. Short-term property is which held for 12 months or less. So it's really 365 days versus 366 days if it comes right down to days. Why does that make such a difference? Well, for long-term capital gain property, the donor generally, and keep in mind, I'm not giving specific advice here, right? I'm just talking generally in most instances. A lot of smart people on the line here, and we could all come up very easily with hypotheticals where any one of the things I talk about wouldn't be true in a particular fact situation. But generally, for gifts of long-term capital gain property, you can generally claim a federal income tax charitable deduction for the FMV of the property, the fair market value. So let's take a simple example. Assume Jill Donor, and by the way, how many of you have met Jill Donor? If you haven't, before today, you're going to hear a lot about her in the next few minutes or so. So assume Jill Donor has held publicly traded stock for more than a year, so 366 days or more. The stock is valued at $10,000, which Jill Donor bought for $1,000. In other words, the stock has a cost basis of $1,000. If Jill Donor makes a gift of this stock to a qualified charitable organization, she can claim a deduction for the FMV of the stock, $10,000. Obviously, it doesn't take a mathematician to realize this is a substantial benefit versus short-term capital gain property. Because for short-term capital gain property, 364 days, 365 days or less, the stock is valued at 10,000, has a cost basis of 1,000. If she makes a gift of this stock to a qualified charitable organization, then she can claim a deduction only for the cost basis of the stock. So it's easy to see, again, does not take Einstein to see that it's generally advisable to gift long-term capital gains assets, right? There's going to be a bigger charitable deduction. And in some cases, depending on the appreciation, there could be an enormous difference between the appreciated value and the cost basis. Well, let's talk about what I think is maybe one of the ideal assets for non-cash assets for charitable giving, which is long-term, publicly traded, appreciated, long-term, publicly traded stock. And that's a bit of a mouthful. So let's just define our terms really quick. Appreciated obviously means increased in value. Long-term stock simply means, again, stock held for 366 days, more than a year. And publicly traded stocks means a publicly held company whose ownership is dispersed among the general public in many shares, which are freely traded on a stock exchange, or in some limited cases in what we would call over-the-counter markets. But generally, we're talking about stock that's freely traded on a stock exchange of some sort. So what are the benefits of ALTPTS, appreciated long-term publicly traded stock? Well, I think there's several. Now, if Jill Donor sells, if Jill Donor sells stocks, I put real estate here, that's a topic coming up, sorry. If Jill Donor sells stocks, she has to pay capital gains tax, right? But if Jill Donor donates the stock to a qualified charity, she does not have to pay capital gains tax. So, that's a significant tax savings. Also, as we've already discussed, she can have a charitable deduction of the fair market value. And this is something that's near and dear to my heart, this third advantage, and near and dear, I think, to the heart of the folks that support and work with and in the CFNEIA, and that is the endowiowa tax credit. I've got a link here if you want to know more, but I think most, probably all of you know that you can receive a state tax credit of 25% under certain circumstances. So we're talking about sort of being able to bunch three pretty significant, potentially anyway, state and federal tax benefits. But a couple more things with regard to stocks. Substantiation rules for gifts of securities, publicly traded, appreciated long-term stocks, they're more relaxed for gifts of other types of donated property. There's an IRS Form 8283, of IRS Form 8284 that, when you give non-cash assets and the qualified charity sells those, the donor and donee may have to fill those out. That is not the case for stocks, publicly traded securities. Also, if the gift is fair market value is more than $5,000, generally, if you have a non-cash gift and its value is more than $5,000, generally you require a qualified appraisal by a qualified appraiser. And that is, I wouldn't say a gigantic hassle, but maybe a medium hassle. It's a hoop for sure. Well, gifts of publicly traded securities, what we've been talking about, do not require an appraisal to document value. And if you think about it, that makes a lot of sense, right? It's publicly traded stock. The whole world can see what the stock is worth on any given day, or what the stock is worth on any given month, and so on and so forth. So no qualified appraisal by a qualified appraiser for gifts of stock more than $5,000, whereas other types of non-cash assets, you may well have to do an appraisal by an appraiser. Now, one question that has sometimes come up by clients that are very curious is, what's the value, like where do you pinpoint the value of publicly traded securities? And it's actually quite a simple calculation. On the date of the gift, so the date the gift kind of goes through to the charity, it's simply the mean of the highest and lowest selling price on the date of the gift. So pretty straightforward. Again, even math that I can do, right? So that's it in terms of the benefits of long-term, appreciated long-term publicly traded stock or publicly traded securities. Any questions, concerns, comments? And notice I don't have any drawbacks because I'm not sure what they are. I suppose a drawback, while you're thinking of any questions you have, I suppose a drawback might be that some nonprofits don't have the, quote, sophistication to handle gifts of stock, right? There may be some medium or especially small nonprofits, but then you know what you do? You simply call up Lori Everhart and say, hey, can you help me make a gift? Or call Kay England or Jenna in marketing. I'm sure could connect you with the right person on that given moment. And CFNEIA can help you transfer that stock to the charity of your choice. So I think the only quote downside of gifts of publicly traded stock might be that some charities, some nonprofits aren't prepared to kind of handle that. It's a little above their sophistication level. But again, you just need to call your local friendly community foundation and they'll help you out with that. Isn't that right, Lori? And Kay, I assume that's correct.
Absolutely.
Yeah, 100%. And they're very easy to find. Heck, you can talk to them right after, at 1 o'clock, you can probably get in contact with, you can get in contact with them now while I'm speaking and talk about the stock gifts that you may want to give to CFNEIA or through CFNEIA. Well, let's move on then to real estate. Here, the benefits aren't as good. But they're still pretty good because, again, if Jill Donor owns some real estate and wants to donate it to a qualified charity, she does not have to pay capital gains tax, significant savings. If she sells the real estate, she will have to pay capital gains tax. Again, there's a charitable deduction of the fair market value, assuming it's a long-term held real estate held for more than a year. And again, you got to make that plug for the amazing Endow Iowa tax credit program. Quick aside, I think many of you know this, maybe most of you know this, maybe all of you know this, but there is nothing in the United States that really approaches the Endow Iowa tax credit program. In other words, if we were to sit and list all the wonderful things about living in Iowa that are unique to Iowa, I would put the Endow Iowa tax credit somewhere near the top. There are other states that give tax credits for state tax credits for charitable donations, but they're relatively few. There are a lot more requirements in other states. And I don't think there's any, in fact, I'm sure there's nowhere that approaches 25%, which if you think about it is a really generous, I mean, 1/4 of the gift potentially can be, you can get a dollar for dollar credit. And keep in mind, again, this is the Endow Iowa tax credit. That's better than a deduction. It's a dollar for dollar credit. So potential drawbacks to charitable gifts of real estate. I put one line, is it a dumpster fire? So every once in a while, I've run into, and nonprofits I've worked with, including community foundations, have come across donors that I'm sure are very well-meaning, but they're gifting real estate that has some significant problems. It may have environmental concerns. It may have, maybe there's some sellability problems for one reason or another. It's not really, super great real estate for a particular use. And then there's been a small minority of folks that I sometimes have come across where it seems like maybe they're kind of dumping. Can't read anybody's mind, but I do wonder if they're attempting to sort of dump what an unprofitable or even a kind of a liability situation. Real estate, they're kind of trying to dump it and just get a charitable deduction or just kind of get rid of it. That means that nonprofits are going to have to do, the fact that there's even that small minority of folks means that nonprofits are going to have to do a lot of due diligence. And even if you are giving real estate with the best of intentions, and it's wonderful, pristine real estate, and it's terrific, and the charity is absolutely lucky, indeed blessed, for this person to approach them with the gift of this particular real estate. Even in that case, the charity is going to have to do, the nonprofit is going to have to do some due diligence. They're simply going to be required to do so by probably their gift acceptance policies, by their board, right? They're going to have to look and make sure there aren't any problems. There aren't any environmental concerns, liability concerns. It is sellable, and so forth. So even if you're giving just an absolutely wonderful gift of real estate, there are some hoops that you're going to have to jump through as a donor, and as a donee, same thing. So that's the potential drawback to charitable gifts of real estate. Now let's talk about a specific type of gift of real estate, and that's called a life estate. And this has sometimes been marketed as give away your house and keep the keys. And we're going to parachute into Jill Donor's life yet again and talk about her lake house. So Jill Donor owns a beautiful house in Cedar Falls, say, and then owns a lake house in Western Iowa. And, you know, when she was younger and the kids were younger, they used to go to the lake house much more frequently. The kids are kind of grown now. She's getting older, uh, and you know, not the same interest in going to the lake house as there once was. And maybe the children, suppose they're adult children, they do like the lake house, but none of them really seem super excited to you know, inherit the lake house someday or to take over the lake house. So let's kind of posit that kind of example. And as you think about it, you could see lots of people in this situation with second homes or vacation homes or hobby farms, hobby ranches, that sort of thing, where it once made sense for them to spend a lot of time and effort keeping up that that second house, that vacation property, that hobby ranch, that hobby farm. But now, as time has grown on, they use it less, but they still use it. So, what they could do is give away a life estate, and that is they could keep the through their lifetime or through a number of years or a combination of both. So it can be lifetime, lifetimes, or a period of years, or some combination thereof. So they can keep the life use of the real estate. But once that period, that term period, whether it's a lifetime of Jill Donor, or whether it's a lifetime of Jill Donor and her husband, or whether it's 25 years, or some mix of all that, after that, then the life estate has been pledged to a qualified charity, and the qualified charity essentially inherits. I'm using inherit very generically here, but essentially inherits once the life estate term is up. And I think this is a very underutilized term, again, considering the amount of folks that have property they maybe want to use for their lifetime, but beyond that, not so sure. This might be especially true for folks that don't have kids or direct heirs. And so there's maybe not necessarily, you know, a desire to pass it along to someone else. So in any case, what is the benefit to the donor? The benefit is, even though they're giving away the future use, the future enjoyment of the property, they can get a tax deduction, a charitable income tax deduction now, at the time that they pledge to, you know, give away the life estate. So if I were to approach, or Jill Donor were to approach Kay and Lori today, then they could get and do a life estate. They could get a charitable deduction today, or at least soon, even though they get to use the property for the next 25 years or for Jill's lifetime or whatever. So that can be kind of cool, right? Like you can have all the benefits and all the advantages of owning your lake house, but know that once a certain period of time passes, or once someone's life ends, I guess, or again, a combination, then that's going to go to, say, CFNEIA, and, you know, could be of real benefit to them, right? So again, I think it's a significantly underused a type or tool or technique about charitable giving. And Lori earlier was kind enough to mention my blog, and I do have, and I should have cited them here, and I apologize, but through the magic of Google and other search engines, I think if you type in Gordon Fischer blog life estate, you'll come up with several blog posts explaining life estates in more detail, if that's something you're interested in learning more about. Or heck, drop me an email too. I'd be happy to send you links or talk to you about it.
Gordon,
Yes.
and Kay, just a quick question, maybe something for another day, but I'm just curious, in general, as charitable organizations, as a community foundation, do you sort of have a two-pronged reaction to real estate donations. Well, I really appreciate it, but it depends what it is. What I'm thinking is some real estate donations can have a lot of headaches with it, I assume.
Yes.
And so is that generally the case? You'll take what you can get, but a lot of times you're probably just selling it off quickly just to turn that into cash.
Yeah, that's a good point, Mike. Yeah, I mean, we do have a policy around accepting non-cash gifts. So it would have to be, the property would have to be vetted through that system. And again, we would be looking at the risk, is there underground oil well buried there? Or is it an Indian burial ground or, whatever it might be. So typically, yes, cash is preferred because we know exactly how to process that. But we have accepted real estate, and actually we were in a conversation a couple of years ago with a camp up in, actually it was in Minnesota or just over the Minnesota border, where they were interested in doing maybe this life estate, or what did you, I lost where you, yeah, you call it life estate. Yeah. But then that it kind of fell through. But again, it kind of fell through while we were doing our due diligence, and it felt like an asset that was going to be coming along with more barriers and burdens than maybe it was worth at that time.
Okay, thank you. That makes sense that there's policies to screen that through. One suggestion, if it's a natural oil well, you may want that ground.
So
Good
true.
point, Mike. Thank you.
Yeah, so true. Mike, an excellent point. Kay, an excellent response. And you put it so much more pithily than I could or did. You're sort of, when you get approached by a gift of real estate, I think as a nonprofit or a community foundation, you're both excited and a little bit nervous or maybe even scared, right? I've helped with gifts of real estate, and it's worked out great. It's been a really big boon for the charity. On the other hand, there's a lot of hoops to jump through. Real estate gifts are, among many other reasons, real estate gifts are a primary reason to have a very robust gift acceptance policy, so that and everyone knows what steps you have to take before you accept a gift of real estate. Sometimes also there's a fair amount of diplomacy involved, because people maybe like, why don't you want to accept this camp, or what, well, we do, but we want to go through and make sure, it makes sense for everyone. And again, another nice reason to have a gift acceptance policies to say, well, sort of make the gift acceptance policy the bad guy, so to speak. Well, we'd love to accept your Indian burial ground, but our gift acceptance policy, we'd love to accept your Superfund site, but our gift acceptance policy kind of forbids that. We really appreciate your generosity. Is there some other way we can work with you? So excellent point.
We did turn down a cash or a property actually in the Cedar Valley area a few years ago, because it had been on the market for a long time and it wasn't liquidating. And so we kind of thought, oh, how long do we want to manage, a property that's on the market? And, we can only do our charitable good once we turn that into cash, right? And so we actually turned down the property, and within 3 months it sold. So we're like,
yeah, you just don't know. Unlike, say, we're talking about non-cash assets, that's kind of why I put stocks first, because you really know what you're getting, and it's fairly easy, right? Especially if they're publicly traded stocks, very much so. You know what you're getting. It's as good as cash. In some ways, it's better than cash for the donor, because there's maybe some extra tax goodies involved or tax benefits involved. Real estate can be much more tricky. There's definitely a downside, but there's also an upside. There's been people that I've worked with that had different investment properties and had charitable intent, and said, hey, I don't need 10 investment properties. I can get by with 9. And, the property was readily marketable and it just worked out great. But even in that situation, there's some hoops to jump through. But again, in the right situation, real estate can be a great gift. Somebody may be able to give, real estate worth $50,000 or $100,000 or more, where they couldn't give that amount in cash or with any other asset. So some pluses, some minuses. It really isn't a case by case, situation. And I think Mike and KU highlighted, some of the problems or issues that might attach to gifts of real estate.
Gordon, we
Yeah.
did have a question, if I can
Yeah,
just
please.
ask. Virginia had asked, and I believe she was talking about an example of maybe a life estate, and she'll correct me if I have this wrong. What happens if then later Jill Donor needed to sell that property?
So it would be, you'd enter into, that is a great question. A wonderful question, because when Jill Donor makes the decision to enter into a life estate, say with the community foundation, it's irrevocable. So, if she needs to sell it, it's essentially tough luck. It's obviously a situation, it's irrevocable, just like some trusts are irrevocable. There would be a gift agreement that would be entered into. You definitely want legal counsel, possibly legal counsel on both sides, separate legal counsel for both the donor and the donee. And you'd want a detailed gift agreement to make sure that things like irrevocability is expressly laid out, the responsibility for taxes and upkeep, and what if the place burns down, and who pays the insurance, and Virginia, how much insurance needs, does it have to be a $1 million policy, $3 million? All that kind of stuff needs to be detailed in a gift agreement. So, again, I think an underutilized charitable technique, but like with other gifts of real estate, Virginia and everyone, I think, it's complicated, certainly much, much more complicated than cash. What I come back to again is this might allow someone to make just a really large charitable contribution through either a life estate or a straight up gift of real estate that they couldn't make with any other asset, that they couldn't make with cash, right?
Gordon, I have another follow-up question. Oh, I'm sorry, Kay, were you gonna go to the question as well? Okay.
Go ahead.
A follow-up question, Matthew asked, though irrevocable, does the tax clawback still exist?
Yes, the tax clawback, if you're talking about the Medicare or government benefits clawback, yes. So if, and that would be something else that would be handled. I think most people know if you spend money, or spend assets, use assets up, give assets away, sell assets toward the end of life, and then you have government benefits, Medicare, Medicaid, that sort of thing, then there's a government clawback. And government clawbacks, basically, everyone kind of take precedence over all. So you'd also want a clause, or maybe more than a clause, in the gift agreement about a life estate dealing with a government clawback. The federal government or the state government in the clawback arena, they're going to get their piece no matter what. So that's something important to keep in mind.
They're top of the food chain is what you're saying, Gordon?
They are top of the food chain.
And then comes charitable, and then family.
Yes. Well, no. Community foundations.
There you go.
And then charitable, and then family.
Okay.
Or that's how I look at it. But they are absolutely top of the food chain. They can kind of come in and do anything. And I've, unfortunately had clients, indeed even friends or families I've known, that have maybe not made the super best decision with regard to disposition of assets, and then have faced a government clawback. But it's probably a topic for another time. We could easily spend an hour on what to do, and especially what not to do to kind of be faced with a big clawback bill.
Gordon, I unfortunately have that 12:45 stop, so I'm going to bow out, but thank you very much for your time today. It was informative. Everybody have a good afternoon.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it a lot. Have a great afternoon.
You too. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks for participating. So moving forward, we're one soldier down, but we still got some wonderful people online. So let's soldier on, and we've still got 15 minutes. We'll be sure not to go over. Let's talk about retirement benefit plans. We were talking about stocks earlier, where I see very little downside. Then we talked about real estate, where there's certainly downsides that we have to explore and make sure that the donor and the donee are on the same page, right? And the donee and donor both have to do due diligence. Now let's go back to retirement benefit plans, where I think it's pretty much all upside. So the most important aspect perhaps of retirement benefit plans in terms of charitable giving is the IRA charitable rollover. And basically individuals who are 70.5 years of age and older and have an IRA, and those are two absolute requirements. You have to be 70.5 years or older, and it has to be an IRA, not another type of benefit plan. They can donate up to $100,000 from their IRAs directly to charity without having to count the distributions as taxable income. So this is, again, hugely important because taxpayers age 70.5 and older often required to make RMDs, could be included in the taxpayer's adjusted gross income subject to taxes. Instead, the IRA charitable rollover permits taxpayers to make donations to qualified organizations from IRAs without counting them as part of their AGI, and consequently no taxes paid on them. Who's eligible? We've already covered that, 70.5 years or older, and it's got to be an IRA. IRAs only. The cap cannot exceed $100,000 in any year, and the limit is per IRA owner, not per IRA. So if I'm 70.5 years or old, let's say Jill Donor is 71 years old and has 5 IRAs, well, her cap is still just $100,000. The amount is not portable or shareable between spouses. It's permanent law. Several years ago, Congress couldn't decide whether this should be made, quote, permanent, or whether, it would just hold for 1 year and then it would lapse for a year. It was always a question of whether the light switch was on or off. We don't have to worry about that anymore. The IRA charitable rollover is permanent law. Although, permanent law, as a lawyer, permanent law just means, until Congress decides they want to change it, right? And they pass a bill. But in any case, there's no sunset, right? One interesting little trap, and this is true for real estate or really any non-cash asset. The charitable contribution from an IRA and other types of other types of non-cash assets must go directly to a public charity, a nonprofit. So you don't want to get into a situation where someone takes money out of their IRA, puts it in their bank, and then gives it to CFNEIA. They spoiled it, right? And that could be a trap that might be easy to fall into. Same with stocks. If you want to get the full tax advantage from stocks, don't sell the stock, take the money, and then give it to CFNEIA. You need to work with CFNEIA so that they can directly receive the stock, directly receive the charitable contribution from the IRA. So it's got to go directly to charity. I've got some IRA charitable rollover FAQs, which I think are pretty straightforward, and I think most of you know. I do want to thank you all, and this is explicitly in my outline, for still paying attention at this point in my presentation. If you hadn't been paying attention, I was just going to scroll really fast by that. But since you are paying attention, thank you, because I know it's been a minute, right? It's been 50 minutes. Charitable gifts of life insurance, very briefly, 3 ways you can do it, and then I linked explicitly or expressly to a blog post. A donor can make a lifetime gift of a life insurance policy. So in other words, you've paid up a life insurance policy. You could name the charity as the beneficiary of a life insurance policy. And that is also true, by the way, of retirement benefit plans, right? So you could take a 401k, IRA, the alphabet soup of retirement benefit plans, and you could always take the beneficiary and make it CFNEIA or another qualified charity, which is a very tax-wise gift to give, because the nonprofit will receive it. In the case of retirement benefit plans, the nonprofit will receive that retirement benefit plan and not have to pay tax on it because they're a nonprofit. Whereas if you give it to your kid, a cousin, another person, there's going to be some tax implications, right? And maybe some significant tax implications with regard to that retirement benefit plan. Okay, so you could name a charity as the beneficiary of a life insurance policy death benefit. I think that makes a lot of sense, or can. Or you can take donations that would have been made to a favorite charity. I think this is when you'd want to work with a really astute financial advisor to make sure, of which there are several right on this call. You could take donations that would have been made to the favorite charity, use this money to pay premiums toward a life insurance policy, ultimately leveraging the cash into a much larger gift. And that's something people have done, and it's worked pretty well.
Hey, Gordon, I was just going to mention, just this year, we had that situation set up where an individual went through underwriting and set it up specifically to benefit 2 charities. And it's a pretty large life insurance policy, and we own the policy, and at their death, 2 nonprofit organizations will be benefiting from that. So she's able to deduct her premium because we own it, right? We have control over that. So it's kind of a unique one.
Absolutely. There's someone very close to me, in my family, that has done the same thing. It's pretty amazing when you look at how a life insurance policy can grow when that person passes away. There's going to be an absolute windfall to one of their favorite charities, one of their favorite causes. So for people that are really serious about leaving a legacy, as I talked about at the outset of this presentation, this might be one of the most important things we talk about, because with some planning, with a financial advisor, and working with the nonprofit, again, you can really take and multiply, perhaps by many, many times, the impact that a gift would have, right? So tangible personal property, artwork, collections, and so on. Now, tangible personal property is a lawyer's fancy way of saying stuff, so if you want to donate your stuff to your favorite charity, what are the tax consequences? And here, the amount of the income tax charitable deduction depends on a concept called related use. So if your tangible personal property is considered related to the charity's exempt purpose, the deduction is based on FMV. If the property is considered unrelated to the public charity's exempt purpose, then generally speaking, not always, you have to reduce the FMV by any amount that would have been long-term capital gain had you sold the property for its fair market value. So another fancy way of saying something relatively simple, if the FMV was greater than the basis, your deduction is going to be limited to the basis. So in order for a donor of tangible personal property to deduct its full FMV, the charity must use the object in a manner that's related to the charity's exempt purpose. A classic example here would be gifting a piece of art, like a sculpture or a painting, to an art museum. Normally, charities are pretty big on taking these non-cash non-cash assets, turning around and selling them. We've alluded that several times in our discussion today, right? Almost always charities are going to turn around and sell that property, and that needs to be understood by all the parties involved. You know, in this situation, that could affect in a negative way the deduction that the donor makes. So let's take an example, hypothetical. Jill donor owns a painting now worth $100,000. She purchased it for only $20,000. Let's suppose if donor gives this painting to an art museum, the art museum keeps and displays the painting, donor can deduct the painting's full $100,000 FMV. If the donor gives the same painting to, say, a nature conservancy, which sells the painting and uses the proceeds, the donor can only deduct the $20,000 cost. There are some exceptions to this related use rule, but I think for most people, it's a good idea to keep this, the general doctrine of related use in mind, and then go look at the exceptions. So now keep in mind that even if the object is potentially related to a charity's mission, such as the painting given to an art museum, if the art museum is just going to sell it on receipt, then the gift's not for a related use. But from our hypothetical, looking at it from a different viewpoint, it doesn't necessarily have to be gifted to a museum to be considered a related use. There was a famous private letter ruling, I guess famous among those that follow these things. The IRS ruled that a gift of art to a Jewish community center would be for a related use, as the artwork had both religious and cultural significance, and it was going to be displayed. They weren't going to sell it, it was going to be displayed. Painting, another hypothetical you might concoct, a painting gifted to, say, a hospital might be for related use if the hospital displays it in a common area, arguing or stating that it helps foster a healing environment, right? So the big takeaway for nonprofits would be nonprofit boards and staff should know and understand about related use so they can recognize the issue if it arises, and also maybe dig down and look at some of the exceptions. The big takeaway for donors, I think should also realize the related use issues and probably should obtain in writing the charity's intent to use the property for a purpose related to its mission, so that there's communication all the way around. With the 2 minutes we have remaining, let me just say, moving away from non-cash assets, there is an important $300 cash above the line deduction. Even if you don't itemize, and many people don't anymore, because as you know, through the Tax Act of 2017, the standard deduction was raised so high that for most people, maybe the vast majority of people, it doesn't make sense to itemize anymore. Therefore, the charitable deduction doesn't come into play. But there is a $300 above the line deduction if you give $300 or up to $300 to a qualified charity. If it's a spouse situation, then it's $600. There's a bunch of ins and outs. It's basically that simple, but there are a bunch of ins and outs, and there's an excellent little article that I've linked here that talks about the $300 above the line deduction. But I kind of think every nonprofit in the world should be asking, or in America, I guess, governed by American tax law, every nonprofit governed by American tax law should be asking for $300 from all of its donors and explaining that they can use an above the line deduction. It's 1 o'clock. I appreciate your patience so much. If folks have comments or questions, I'm happy to stay on the line and answer them. I'm happy to stay on Zoom and answer them, but please don't feel obligated to do so. I just want to sincerely thank everybody for their time and attention. It was so nice to have such a receptive audience. And thank you again to CFNEIA for all that you do for our shared community, indeed for our entire state. So keep up your great work, Kay and Lori and Jenna, as I know you will. So with that, I will say goodbye to those that need to move on and be happy to answer questions or concerns if folks want to hang around. Thank you all very much. I really appreciate it.
All right, thank you so much, Gordon. And yeah, if just thank you all for being here. If you need to head on out, we appreciate your time. But yeah, again, if anybody has any further questions or anything and wants to stick around, I'm also willing to kind of hang out here as well. So thank you all so much.